Please welcome our last speaker of the day, Dani Kahil, a solution specialist. Today he will be presenting 7 key tips for requirements elicitation in Dynamics 365. Please stick around after Dani's session for a live Q&A.
Hi all, welcome to DynamicsCon 2021. Thank you for your time. Thank you for attending this amazing conference. It's a new conference, so last year was a huge success and I really enjoyed presenting, and this year, so I reapplied again. It was way harder to get selected, but yeah, thank you all for choosing my session. So before we start really the presentation today I'd like to remind you that there is also a chat section where you can type in your questions. So I'll be actually reviewing your question because I'm following the session with you. And then at the end, we can discuss some of these questions live together after the presentation. So the topic I have chosen to present this year are around requirements, right? So I thought I would present about 7 key tips for requirements elicitation in Dynamics 365, right? And some of you might know me from previous presentation or the articles I share. I'm a lot around requirements and requirements understanding, and that shared understanding of requirements is very important for me, and I really specialize in this area. So I thought I would share this year like the 7 key tips and techniques I use doing requirement elicitation on my Dynamics 365 and Power Platform project. So a quick intro about myself. So I live in Australia on the Gold Coast. So it's a city that is in between Brisbane and Sydney, and they have beautiful beaches, but they also have, the Gold Coast also have beautiful hills and subtropical rainforests. So together with my wife and two daughters, we really enjoy those long walks either at the beach or in the countryside. I'm a big fan of body attack and body pump. Being active is very important to me, so I really try to schedule a few of those sessions every week. And then, yeah, if you haven't seen some of my diagrams, well, I love kind of diagrams and visuals, and to really, again, share and make sure that we have a shared understanding of what we're going to do. So I love colorful diagrams and I love colorful shirts when I kind of do presentation, just to, especially the diagrams. Again, some of those I'll be sharing with you today. But that's kind of a bit what's about me. And now we can effectively go into the agenda. And what I prepare for you today is really, I divided the agenda in kind of 3 sections where we talk about diagrams. So 3 key diagrams I use in most or in most of my projects. So it's the use case diagram, the process flow diagram, and the conceptual diagram. And I will give you some examples and story and explain you how I use them. I also have other techniques that I complement to those. It's the shadowing session, which is the observation technique. I use a lot of prototyping as well when I elicit requirements. And the last one from the techniques I'll be presenting today is I really use stories as well when I engage with my audience and my stakeholders to extract requirements. I use real life stories and example to try to make the journey of implementing Dynamics relatable to them, so that again they can share as much valuable information with me as possible, so that I can capture those requirements. And the last one I wanted to share, it's more a technique that I'm still experimenting with. It's called the abstraction laddering, and it's inspired from design thinking. I've used it a few times, not using it in all of my projects, but I thought it's a very valuable one when you use it in specific situation. And I thought I would share this technique with you today. So that's really for the agenda. Now, those 7 techniques are only part of an arsenal of tools, right? So the punchline really for today that I wanted to kind of highlight is that there is no one way for requirements elicitation. There is way more techniques. There is way more tips and ways to elicit requirements, right? So this is my way of doing it. So the tools and techniques that I present today are just a subset again of some of the existing tools, but it's a subset of tools I use. I use I use way more tools and techniques, and not all of them, not all of those techniques are for each of the projects, right? It's almost like a tool set. A tool set like you have at home with all kind of tools to kind of fix things, and you use the correct techniques or the correct technique for the correct situation. And again, last point is really experiment. So I experiment a lot with some of the techniques. I have my chosen ones that I use a lot. But I experiment really a lot with those different techniques to see how they work, and then I get better and better and better at it as much as I experiment with some of them. So that's for the punchline. Now the arsenal, as I was saying, right, and I call it the arsenal of techniques. As I was saying, there's not only those 7 techniques that I'm showing it to you today. Those are the key ones I use. But if you take, for example, an agile project, right, and it's kind of my view of an ideal agile project, where you start with your project context, you have your challenges, we have your solution business benefits, then you identify the key users and actions, and then you have your whole envisioning before the project, then you go to project delivery. So where are we going to focus today? And that's kind of following an agile methodology. We're going to focus on this piece, the analysis and design. And so read the analysis and design on an agile project, right? Where again, you're going to empathize and understand users, define and ideate solutions, and then prototype and proof of concept. Again, validate requirements using those prototypes, right? And in the arsenal of techniques that I was telling you, there are plenty, right? And then again, I only have chosen seven of the key ones I use. But there are multitude of techniques, and those are the ones I used at least once as part, but there are many more. And I will give you at the end of the presentation, I will give you some resources where you can look for additional resources, right? So if we quickly go over, some are inspired from design thinking techniques like Rose, Thorn, Bud, How Might We, abstraction laddering that we're discussing today, stakeholder map, affinity clustering to group requirements in kind of categories almost, root case analysis, use case diagram that I'm presenting, personas, process flow, user journey. You can use surveys to capture some requirements, user story, conceptual diagram, acceptance criteria to complement your user stories with additional details, shadowing session I'm presenting today, interviews, workshops, stories and example presenting today, architecture diagram, entity diagram, prototypes, and so forth, right? There are many more again. So again, the diagrams or the techniques I'll be presenting today, I highlighted in yellow. So, you have your use case diagram, your process flow, conceptual diagram, shadowing session, stories and examples, prototypes. And then in blue, we have the technique that I told you about, the abstraction laddering, which is the one I'm still experimenting with. I've used it a few times with some mixed results at times, but the more I will be using it, the better I'll be getting at it. But it's a great technique I wanted to share with you today. So without further ado, let's start with the first one, the use case diagram. And I'll give you an example that happened to me on how I use and how powerful that tool is. So we started collaborating with a university 2 years ago. So 2 years ago we didn't started working really with them. It was first kind of first meetings, and then they called us, and they said, look, Dani, we went live with our Dynamics 365 implementation. We live since 2 months. Unfortunately, we have truckload of issues. Business is very unhappy. Can you guys come and take a look and advise how best to fix that situation, right? So effectively, what happened? We went there with one of the colleagues. So I remember driving to the parking of the university and then walking with my colleagues, not really knowing what to expect really of that first meeting with the client. And then we arrive, we meet, the stakeholders in a meeting, and then, they start sharing a lot of information about the project, but the information almost was a little bit too detailed, in a sense that they showed us an Excel spreadsheet with all the backlog of issues they have, very detailed issues that they had. And it was the first time, I was seeing almost the client. It was pretty new to me, and I was overloaded with those details in the Excel spreadsheet. Then the IT director showed me an as-built document, again with tables and tables of entities with fields, and I was kind of droning into that detail of information, and I couldn't find a way to ask the correct question to kind of understand, but what is the system doing really for you? What are the big challenges? What is happening, right? We couldn't really find that starting point to start from a high level and drill down to the details, right? We were missing that high level view at the very beginning. So what I decided to do is I said, look, guys, if you don't mind, I'll use that whiteboard. And I went to the whiteboard, and I want to do a use case diagram of how your users are using the system today. And hopefully we can drill down to the details from there, right? And look, those people were new to me as well. So they didn't really know me either. So I've seen some surprising phases a bit, and kind of I think they were telling to themselves, what is this guy doing now? Already jumping on a diagram and so forth. But that's fine. I started effectively, drafting that use case diagram, and I started by asking, well, who is using your system, right? And then surprisingly, they told me, well, the students are using part of it because they can use the portal, so they can, they can effectively, student can contact customer service, our customer service department by email, phone calls. They can also log in. The students can also log in to the portal, right? So, okay, and I kind of draft that on the whiteboard. So effectively, I'm doing that use case diagram with them, with my client, right? And then what else can the student do? Well, they can log in, and then they can create. I understand that they can create inquiry, right? One of the stakeholders told me they can create inquiry, they can view inquiry statuses. So I continue to drafting the diagram. They can also view FAQ without logging into the portals. Okay, great. I know that down here. Okay, they can view FAQ. Perfect. What else? Right? What's happening? Well, as another actor, they tell me we have the customer service agent, right? Now, the customer service agent they manage inquiries, right? So they effectively work with inquiries, and what's happening, they can assign inquiries, they told me, and then they can also, assign inquiries, edit inquiries. They can also create inquiries from there, right? And, very quickly, and look, that diagram that I presented, it's kind of, I didn't want to share any NDA information here. So that's kind of an example. The diagram we did was way more complex with way more actions. But then effectively what we did is we started from the high level view, and then we pinpoint to the issue. And then the client told me, Dani, the biggest problem we have is that whole manage inquiries. Effectively, what's happening is inquiries are assigned to the wrong persons. The inquiries also need to be integrated with backend systems. The integration doesn't work well, and so forth. Then kind of from this high level, we could kind of now go to detailed discussions. And then this is where it's a nice transition to the following diagram that I use, because I remember then during the same meeting, I said, okay, can you please explain me the process, the business process of managing inquiries, right? And this is where we went to the next kind of diagram, still on a whiteboard, where we effectively drafted the process flow diagram of the current state, right? So there are sometimes a bit of confusion when you draft process flow diagrams. You have to remember there is process flow for the current state, and then you can have process flow diagram for a to-be state. And both can be used, both are used in different situations, right? The current state, you analyze what is happening now and what are the issues. The to-be state is your future state of how the process will be later, right? So we use actually the process flow diagram for the current state to understand that whole managing of inquiries, right? And we started, right, from there. Okay, you're telling me the whole managing inquiry needs to be improved. Let's start the journey. So effectively, the student starts, submits an inquiry via the portal. The inquiry is created in Dynamics 365. Assign inquiry. This is where, okay, the assignation of inquiry, this is where they tell me, and there is an automation based on very complex rules, and we have huge issues there, right? The inquiry are assigned to the wrong person or to the wrong teams, and kind of we start discussing really some of those details there. But I note down on my kind of high-level issue list, okay, we need to spend more time on understanding what has been done on the assign inquiry functionality and why is it not working correctly, right? And then we continue the process. They tell me, yeah, once the inquiry is assigned by Dynamics, the customer service agent can view and pick inquiry, determine the inquiry types, and then if there is enough information, if there is not enough information, what we do, we contact the client back, and then the client or the students needs to provide more information. If there is enough information in the inquiry, we can research internal FAQs or internal knowledge, and we can effectively, if we find an article, we can send the article to the student, info provided. If we don't find the article, we can create a new internal article, whatever. I mean, that's the process, what they explained me. And then effectively they told me, and again, here, Dani, once the case is closed, once we send the response and we close the case here, this needs to flow to our backend systems. And again, integration is failing at this level, right? So again, an example of how I use, in this case, use case diagram and process flow diagrams together to very quickly identify issues from a complex system, just simplifying that, especially at the beginning of a project when you have a lot of information. It's kind of useful to start from those if they don't exist, to give you kind of a high level understanding of what's happening. All right, so that was the process flow diagram. The next one as well that I use quite often, I call it the conceptual diagram, right? And again, I'll follow the same example I had here, where I'll use the same scenario, the same story, where if you want to draft a conceptual diagram from the previous situation, and it's effectively, conceptual diagram is effectively drafting, showing concepts that your system is touching, right? And it's, again, a very good tool to elicit requirements and ask your audience to participate. So again, in this case, I would do the diagram with my client and I say, okay, we have the student in the centerpiece, because that's the masterpiece, right? And you can start very simple, again, in those conceptual diagram, a few blocks just to identify the core concept. So we started that for that example I provided. We did that together with the client. We said, okay, we have the student in the center. What's happening, right? We have activities, right? Because the students can email, phone call, and create appointments. So the students effectively can interact, and then we record those activities in Dynamics 365. Okay, what else do we have? I understood, and I say to my client, understood we have inquiries, right? Perfect. Let's put inquiry here. What else do we have? If you remember the previous two diagrams, we had knowledge-based article, right? So perfect. I put knowledge-based article. Anything specific maybe that they want to add, So the client told me, well, for the inquiry, we have, case type and case statuses. Okay, that's important to draft here. Let's put them in, right? There is an approval process for the knowledge article. Perfect. Let's add that in. So the more details you can, through your conversation, you can add, the better. Then you have, searching reporting capabilities on top. Often you have your UI, to ask, so how is Dynamics 365 accessed? Mobile, web, Outlook. I understood we have a portal, so I draft the portal on the side with case, knowledge articles, logins, and then we have the whole admin section below where you can manage security role, templates, case routing, and whatever, right? And as you can see very quickly, we have created a draft conceptual diagram together with the client, together based on that scenario, and just to make sure that we have, again, that high level view before drilling down to the deals, because sometimes it's difficult to understand the details if you don't have that high level view of the system. And again, right, it's to elicit requirements, make sure that you have captured everything that the system is doing, or everything that the future system needs to do, because I'm here describing a current system and how to use that for a current system. I'm very often using this for future system, and I would use the same use case diagram to draft what needs to be done, then process flow to kind of understand how the process flow are, and then conceptual diagram, what is the future concept, what are the future concept delivered by the system, right? So that's kind of a very simple draft diagram, as you can see, very easy to create. A more elaborate diagram that I'll show you now, that took me way longer to create, together again with some external feedback, is, for example, that's kind of an end state. I mean, there is never an end state because the system is in constant evolution, but kind of a good diagram in a good shape. And then as we go through the project, we can kind of tweak things. So for example, in this diagram, we have, again, the student in the middle. This is, by the way, the conceptual diagram for the K-12 accelerator that is available. So Dynamics 365 provides some industry accelerator. That is the diagram I created for the K-12 accelerator, because we were evaluating that accelerator for another client. So I've created that one to kind of share, again, some ideas about what that diagram, what the K-12 accelerator is covering. So I could quickly explain to the client, well, we have the students, we have timeline with activities, and then you have, your internships for the student, scholarships, incidents happening. You have the previous education with school accounts. You can capture course sections with course history, all the courses, the assessments, program levels, knowledge article cases. You see, this is a little bit inspired from the previous, or the previous diagram is inspired from this one. We have, you can connect the student portal with some activities and some features there, virtual agents, forms, and surveys, and then the user interface. So again, right, this is a way nicer, more pretty in a way diagram, but it meets the same functionalities as the previous one. And I build those diagrams in iterations. So I would start with a very simple one, like I did before, together with the client. And as we go through the project and the workshop, we tweak. I mean, I tweak. I kind of play with the diagram, but based on the feedback from my audience, right? Based on what they tell me, I add things in the diagram, or I move things around. Right, so those were the 3 diagrams I wanted to cover with you. The next 3 I'll be discussing now are more techniques. So it's not really diagrams, but it's more techniques that I use to elicit requirements. And the first, what I wanted to show to you, is the one called shadowing sessions, or observation, right? And again, it's quite simple, right? It consists of observing another user doing a task, right? Instead of just doing an interview and understanding and hoping they tell you everything, and hoping you ask the correct question, you sit down next to them and you see what they do, right? So the power in this is that you will capture some unspoken requirements, you will capture emotions, you will capture frustrations that sometimes in workshops or interview will not get discussed or addressed, or simply because the user has been doing something for so many years, that's not an issue for them. But when you see it, it kind of strikes you, right? So again, I will share with you 2 examples. of how I use those, right? So, so that you can better understand again how I use those techniques, right? So the first example is about I was assigned to go with a field technician to fix a machine, and that's kind of the machine we were going on site to fix. It happened a few months ago, actually, not that long ago. So I had to go on site to the client, meet a very friendly field service agent. He took me on site. We had a good chat in the car. He kind of explained the whole history of the company, and then explaining what. So he gave me the context, and he told me, Dani, we're going on site. We're going to fix this machine. I have some equipment that I took from the warehouse this morning, and then we need to replace a piece of equipment on that machine because it's not working correctly, right? So effectively we arrive on site, and then he opens the boot of his truck, and then he connects his laptop, as you can see here. And then he kind of explains me the procedure, and he tells me, Dani, before we even start, working, what I do when I arrive on site is, you see, I plug in my laptop, and then I have this paper. This is from the warehouse with the pieces of equipment, I took. And then what's happening is that he opens an email on his laptop. He retrieves from the email, he opens the PDF. And he opens the web application, right? They use kind of a web application to capture the details of the work that they were performing. It's almost like a job that they fill into that web application. And then this is really what struck me, right? And then for half an hour, he fills in a job, I think it was called the work order. He was starting his job, so a work order form, and then he fills like 50 different fields into that application by retyping information from the email. And then he has to open the email to kind of find some information. He had to open the PDF to find another piece of information there and retype. He had to type some information that he was looking at that paper and retyping some information from the paper into that web application. And took him like half an hour just to retype everything before he can even start his work, right? And it really struck me. And I said, let's call him David. And I said, David, why are you retyping everything, right? And then he kind of looked at me and said, well, Dani, I've been doing that since 10 years, I think already. And it never really, it's how I work, right? And otherwise I don't get paid. And it really struck me, right? So we were actually, so it was for a field service implementation. And it's really something that I put big in red into the current issues is all this retyping of information from all the different disparate systems, right, and different disparate processes. We absolutely needed to, when we would implement Dynamics, field service would absolutely need to kind of solve that and make sure that, that web application captures, at least most of the information here, not letting him retype everything. Right. The second scenario quickly that I wanted to cover was for an existing client using Dynamics 365, and it was a case management system. So we implemented case management, and then we had workshops. So I was sitting with, it's a sample picture, right? It's not the real picture, but let's say I was sitting with that lady of the reception at the workshop, and then we design the case form together, right? We put nice fields, nice business process flow. We put a lot of fields required to make sure that she captured those information and so forth. And then she did UAT. We went live with this. So it was a sprint project, right? So first sprint was an MVP of that case management form, and then I go, I think a few days after go live, and I sit next to her at the reception, right? And then what I realize is that she opens Dynamics with that case form, and she's submerged by information and submerged by external distractions, people coming in, people calling. She has like 50 different browsers open. So when she started actually creating a case, I think she ended up filling in 3 fields. She couldn't save the case because we had like 7 or 8 fields that were required with a bit of logic. She didn't even have time to save that case because she was constantly distracted, right? And then taking a phone call 10 minutes and then responding to another person coming. Then almost at the end of the session that I had with her, she picked up that case and she completely lost track of where she was. And she said, you know, Dani, yeah, I'll recreate that case later and all those other information, because as you can see, I'm so you know, disturbed by all these distractions, right? And it's really struck me here. Wow, we had workshop with that lady and she never really flagged how she worked. Is really when I sit down next to her that I've seen how she works and how she might use dynamics, that it struck me that we need to simplify the process, right? And what we did, we created a very simple dashboard for her where she could create, you know, case using the quick create form, and then task using the quick create form with a minimal amount of fields. So I could quickly create cases as she go during the day. When she had a bit more time and headspace, she could go back to that list and complete the case with more information. But again, super valuable to have. Prototypes, right? So another one that I use often is prototyping, and especially when you have complex requirements where a lot of business logic on the fields. And an example, it's still from kind of the same clients, an example I wanted to share with you. We had some difficulties capturing the requirements for time entry functionalities in Dynamics, and based on specific fields. So if the type was non-client related, other fields were visible, other fields will show up here. And without really seeing that and making that work, I mean, in a prototype, we couldn't really articulate, and my client had difficulties really articulate those requirements. So we had a series of workshops, and each time I was coming back with, you know, an idea, it was not really there. So what happened is that I effectively start using prototypes and a tool called draw.io. So I'll show you now what does that look like. So as you can see, it's called draw.io. And then I started creating very simple prototypes here, right? Where I can move, you know, fields. So I effectively recreated very simple forms for what had to be done. So I had my time entry. If it's client related, then the client-related category is inquiry. So for example, if you select inquiry, then you have all those fields here showing up with the inquiry. If it's service contact, you have other fields showing up here. So effectively, by showing that to them and showing those different logic, I could effectively articulate and show them effectively how that would look in Dynamics. And then they help me, you know, complement. So I'll just show you all the prototypes that we did in Draw. So again, if the type was this, then this was empty. If the type was of client related, we had other fields populated here. And then we effectively create those prototypes together with the client using Draw. So I was going through their requirements. I could move very quickly fields. Again, from this one. So they were telling me, oh, Dani, would be great to have this one locked or this field there. So I could very quickly, you know, just move the field or add the field here or delete the field and kind of prototype that with them. And yeah, it really simplified the process, because then we could really just, you know, implement those in Dynamics 365 using some business rules to make that work. So again, I use often prototypes, not all the time, but often prototypes to, again, stimulate idea and elicit requirements. Right, stories and example. One of the, so the last really tip or technique I want to share with you is about stories and example, right? And it's one where so I use stories and examples that relate to the client situation and the client requirement, right? And what I mean with that is, again, I'll give you an example that happened to me a few months ago, again, where I was discussing with a client. So I was discussing with the client different contact types, right? So I knew the client was using, where you were interacting with people, and then they had, you know, different type of people with whom they're interacting. They're interacting with clients, they were interacting with family members, referrers, stakeholders. So they were capturing all those kind of type of client. And then I start my workshop, and then I start discussing with them, and I say, well, let's discuss contact type. So as you can see in dynamics here, Vanessa, she, you can use different contact type to have Vanessa, because Vanessa, effectively, she can be a client, but she can also be a family member, right? And as I discuss and present that, I see that some of the stakeholders are a bit lost, right? Why do you want to use contact type? In which scenario do you use that, right? And then one of the stakeholders even told me, but Danny, will I even see it in the list of my clients? How does that work, right? And this is where it kind of struck me that I forgot to really, set the context of when that would be used. So I apologized to my audience. I said, look, let's redo, let's reframe kind of the problem that we're trying to solve here. So I effectively step back a bit, and then what I did is let's imagine a situation. Let's start with a real life story, a real life example, right? So if you have, for example, Vanessa. Let's call her Vanessa. She is, 28 years old, and she suffered from severe anxiety. And my clients was, so it was a company treating people with mental issues. So let's imagine one of your clients, Vanessa, she has severe anxiety. So effectively in Dynamics 365, what you will get, you will create Vanessa, and she will be of type client, right? Because you are now treating Vanessa, so she is one of your client. Now, let's imagine that, I don't know, 6 from now, Vanessa will, her mom gets also enrolled in as one of your clients, right? So you have Vanessa and you have the mom of Vanessa, right? Now, to capture that Vanessa is also a family member of someone else, what do? Do you create Vanessa, the record Vanessa, as another record? That's not ideal, because Vanessa is still the same person, right? So what you do then, you effectively use the contact type family member. So you flag Vanessa as a family member. So you have the same contact with 2 contact types, so that you can effectively reuse, Vanessa, and not create Vanessa as a client and then another record of Vanessa as a family member, right? Because it's still the same person, still with the first name, the first last name, the first emails and so forth. So you don't want to kind of have duplicates in your system, right? And this is how effectively, this worked, where, by telling that story and bringing that scenario close to the scenario to how my client deal with clients, it kind of resonate with them, and they could effectively better understand the requirements and better kind of articulate, and effectively what I got from them, it's an update of those contact types, and also we kind of better articulated, the views and how would that work and so forth. So again, another techniques I use a lot, stories and example, to make sure to elicit requirements and make sure that the requirements or what we want to do in Dynamics is understood by my clients. All right, the last one I wanted to present was the abstraction laddering, and that's the one I'm still experimenting. So I'm not using this in all my projects, and it's one technique that I use that you would use when you want to help your client really articulate requirements where they are not really certain of, right? So when they are still kind of when they have ambiguity around requirements, where they're not really sure about how even to articulate their requirements, you can use that techniques, right? So I had a client effectively telling me that they would like to enable the portals, Dynamics 365 portals. So they had Dynamics 365, they wanted now to enable portals, but they were not sure what to put on that portal, right? What do we even, is it cases? Is it appointment? Is it what kind of information from the client do we want to put on the portal? They were just not sure, because that was new to them. So what we did, we kind of came up with a problem statement, right? So we defined that together with the client. We said, how might we provide the best self-service experience to our clients? So you need that to start the abstraction laddering. You need that problem statement. So we kind of put together that problem statement that we wanted to discuss, and then you have a facilitator. So myself, I was facilitating this, and I had my clients, the stakeholders of my clients here. And then for, I think it was about a half an hour workshop, we sit down, we presented the problem statement to the clients, and then we kind of explain. So what you do then is almost like a brainstorming session where you're going to brainstorm the why. So all together we'll come up. So all the stakeholders are coming up of the why do we want to provide the best surface experience to our clients. You just want to make sure that you are, with the why, that you are tackling the correct problem. And this will help you eventually, find other kind of key problems or re-articulate your problem. So the why really, it's really helping you reframe or make tweaks to the real problem, making sure that you solve the right problem. And the how helps you determine what are the steps to make that work, right? So the abstraction laddering works where you start with the why. So what we did is you time the session, I don't know, a few minutes, 5 minutes, I think it was 5 minutes for everyone to come up with the why, their whys. So everyone put sticky notes, either in a tool like Miro or on a whiteboard. You put sticky notes, like, for example, to improve client satisfactions. That's one of the reasons. To reduce costs, to save time for our clients and staff. So they all, kind of put sticky notes, and then they spend time on explaining, but how. So how might we provide the best self-service experience to our client? Now, how are we going to do that? All right. So some of the stakeholders said, well, we need to determine the key information to display in our plan. So we need an internal work first to determine what information we want to display there. Some people said we need to provide a portal. Yeah, perfect. We need to provide virtual agent functionality. Others said we need to provide chat functionalities, right? Maybe we have an FAQ on the portal and so forth, right? Again, I simplified here in this example to make it easier for you to understand. But in real life examples, I think I had way more ideas for the why, way more ideas for the how, and some really good ones. And then once you finish with those ideas, you ask everyone to vote on. So everyone gets, I don't know, 3 stickers, and they have, again, few minutes to go and vote on the ones they find most important. And 2 reasons why voting is important. First, it helps you with prioritization, but second, it forces everyone else to read through each of the other ideas, because now they need to vote. It's most like a game. They will go and they will start voting on their preferred ideas, right? And then you come up with, maybe the first thing. So how might we determine the best self-service experience for our clients? The first thing you need to do is really discuss internally what information do you want to display on the portal, right? That came up first. And then we discuss about the portal. Then maybe we discuss about the virtual agent functionality. But what information do you want to share with your clients? That was the key one. And my client needed to first do a bit of homework on that before we started with even implementing the technical solution. All right, so those were the 7 techniques I wanted to present with you. I hope you will find values in those 7 resources, and that you can again experiment. Don't hesitate, to connect with me and give me your feedback. You have my LinkedIn profile, so you can always connect with me. I'm happy to have a chat and exchange ideas. So I thought I would share some resources with you at the end to kind of continue your journey. So look, what I often look at as well is the Babok guide. So the business analysis body of knowledge have a lot of different techniques to kind of elicit requirements. It's a big guide, but there is, at the end of the guide, there is a whole section about all the techniques, right? And if you are in a hurry, if you don't want to read everything, you can quickly go there and kind of go through all the techniques and get a bit of an understanding how to use what and when. From LinkedIn Learn, if you just want to start your journey, what I found, and I found those two courses quite interesting. I did them myself a few months ago. I did actually this one a few times, going back to kind of review some ideas. The Business Analysis Foundation is really good, explaining you a lot of some good techniques. I use some others from other resources, but it's a good start. And then you have Design Thinking, Understanding the Process is also a good one to start understanding design thinking and how to incorporate that in your Dynamics 365 and Power Platform implementation. Design Sprint from Google. So Design Sprint Kit from Google. It's also quite an easy website to go to and see all the different techniques again they use. So the abstraction laddering, the how they use those techniques to again elicit requirements. And I don't go through the whole design thinking journey. I kind of pick again some of the design thinking tips and techniques that works best for the situation. I think they might work best, and I experience a lot with them. All right. Again, I hope you enjoy the session, and then we're going now to do the live Q&A. So I'll cover some of the questions that you had in the chat. Don't hesitate to kind of continue adding some of the questions, and I'll see you in a sec. Bye. Thank you. Hey, I think I am live. Great. So thank you for all your questions. It was great interacting with you guys. So yeah, let me cover the first one. So I think there was one question about how do you categorize clients and which maybe tools do you use based on behaviors and industry, from what I picked up. Look, it's a very interesting question, right? And how I see it is more how mature is the client, and some industry tend to be a bit more mature in how they prepare before they engage with a partner. So education or manufacturing or financial services, before they engage with a partner, they have a different level of maturity, I think, of how they structure their requirements. So what I have seen is, for example, manufacturing companies are a bit less, from the experience I had, a bit less kind of prepared and agile in using those techniques, while education or insurance or financial services, they did kind of a bit more of this groundwork before interacting with us. And then I can pick and propose, they are familiar then with a lot of those techniques, and I can use way more of the arsenal from the beginning, while from some industries and some clients where they are a bit less advanced in those requirements gathering techniques, I would really start with the basics. And some of the basics are that I covered today are really the key ones I would use in most of my projects. And then depending how complex is the requirements, I would pick and choose from that arsenal. And then I'm more familiar with some of them than others. So again, it's a lot of experimenting. Each client is different. Each requirement is different. Each stakeholders at your client is different. They have different level of understanding. Some are visual, some are verbal, some are like written. So it's a lot about also your stakeholders. But it's a great question. I think, Sabrina, you asked that question. I would think a bit more about classifying clients based on maybe industries. It's actually a good point. The other questions I see. So Neil, thank you for asking about involving the developers, right? Look, I think you might involve them in, and I think Sabrina also responded, it's actually a good idea, involve them with some of definitely the high level diagrams, right? So conceptual diagram, I would definitely walk through my developers when I walk through all my stakeholders using this, right? With more details, kind of really elicitation, I would probably not involve them. It's probably also a little bit boring for some of them.
I found developers, depending of if they want to learn or they want to know, but I found some a bit less interested. They really want to know, okay, give me now what I need to start coding, and so it's kind of less interesting to them, kind of. So I involve them in that high level overview, definitely, architecture diagram, a process sometimes, but not really in the elicitation sessions. And often as you said, right, it's a little bit more expensive if you have to involve more people in those activities. The other question I see, yes, Sabrina mentioning, I believe that the architecture diagram might be a good idea. Yeah, so that's, yeah, absolutely. So an architecture diagram, or definitely your near D, or those conceptual diagram that I do, are definitely a good, so good kind of artifacts to walk through your development team, so that they can understand, the context. And I would also complement those with, so when I present my diagrams, I sometimes complement them with stories and examples, so that they can better relate to some of the problems the clients have. So I kind of combine a little bit, the storytelling and the example with some of those diagrams. Which software tool are you using for the diagram prototype? So look, I'm a big fan of draw.io, so I'll type it down. It has been renamed now to diagram.net, I think, but it's the same one. It will point you to the same place. Look, I use Visio sometimes, or PowerPoint when I have to, but this one is open. It's an open source, I think, so you can kind of tweak it. It's free. It's interactive. You have layers. You can share it. You can export in different formats, and I export them in kind of a shareable link that display on any browser, and people can kind of interact with them. So I found this quite useful. And for example, when I start a project, I use so we often use a Microsoft Teams site and channel, and then one of the tabs in my Teams in my Teams kind of project is a link, so you can have URLs as a tab. It's a direct URL to the conceptual diagram that we keep on building. So whenever someone wants to understand a bit big picture, they can click on that, and that opens up the whole conceptual diagram. So those are the tools. So draw.io and diagram.net are the one I use mostly. Thank you. I think thank you for the questions and the interactions. It was great to see you guys interacting with me, and you guys have a great day or evening, and hopefully I will see you online or in person, like Neil. I might catch up with you soon when you're back from your island, and see you all.